Petro was well connected, and DeJohn was shrewd enough to turn Carmen into a fighter.
Well, I was a rough, tough walk-in sort of a guy, slugger, winding up my punches, telegraphing them and everything, and he made me put all that away and start all over again from scratch.
Basilio learned fast and soon became the terror of the welterweight division. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to clash with boxing's biggest force, the International Boxing Club, the brainchild of Chicago lawyer Truman Gibson, Gibson's friend and client Joe Louis, and New Jersey press agent Harry Mendel.
After the war, when Louis was going to retire from the title, Gibson came up with the idea that they could turn Louis's heavyweight title into an ongoing money machine in professional boxing.
The plan was that once Louis retired, an organization to promote fighters would be set up in his name.
We'd produce for Joe's corporation 4 fights. We would assign the fighters to Joe Louis Enterprises, and we would sell the contracts to a new corporation. Harry Mendel said, I know a crazy young Irish guy in Coral Gables who would be interested in getting in the fight business. So he called Jim Norris at 4 o'clock in the morning. Jim said, well, I'm a little drunk now, but come out tomorrow morning and we'll talk about it.
Jim Norris was a blue blood who owned companies and businesses in many different fields, an accomplished sportsman, and a big-time gambler.
He had a big racing stable, Spring Hill Farms. He had a couple of horses in the Derby. He would call to see how his horses were doing, and I'd have to read the sports page to him every morning at 7 o'clock, the New York tracks. That's where Norris got his relationship and kinship with guys in the mob.
Acting on the advice of his partner, Arthur Wirtz, Norris bought out Joe Louis for $150,000. In exchange, he got the contracts of the 4 top heavyweight contenders. Then, after arranging for Madison Square Garden to buy out its promoter, Mike Jacobs, Norris had a virtual monopoly on boxing promotion and a silent partner in Frankie Carbo.
You could not get a fight with the IBC unless Norris or Carbo sanctioned it, and they controlled the major arenas.
Jimmy Norris and Frankie Carbo, they were the Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers of boxing, the perfect duo.
It was Milton Berle and boxing that sold the first television sets.
In the 50s, we had the regular Wednesday night fights.
The Wednesday night fights are on the air.
There were the garden fights.
Live from Madison Square Garden.
We put on maybe 170, 175 fights a year.
The IBC's first fight had come on June 15th, 1949. The mob delivered on its promise to Jake LaMotta, and that night, LaMotta beat Marcel Cerdan for the middleweight crown. A week later, Ezzard Charles outpointed Jersey Joe Walcott to win Joe Louis's vacant title. The IBC had locked up boxing's 2 most lucrative belts, with Frankie Carbo controlling the other weight divisions.
The mob made life difficult for Carmen because they couldn't control him. They didn't want him to win.
But Basilio was winning, so much so that he became a star attraction on Ray Arcel's Saturday night fight card.
Ray Arcel gave a lot of fighters an opportunity. Ray was never an enemy in the sense that we worked together. He had some opponents among some of the other elements, but not ever with us.
Arcel had hoped to televise a non-title bout between Basilio and reigning welterweight champion Kid Gavilan. But John DeJohn wanted a title fight for Basilio and dove into the belly of the beast to get one.
I went to New York. I know where Carbo hung around. If you went to Carbo and you told him a story, he didn't promise you nothing. But a week or 2 later, you got what you asked for. Got a call to meet Jim Norris down in New York. So went down and I saw Jim Norris. So Jim Norris says, what's this? You want to make a fight up in Syracuse with Gavilan and Basilio? What kind of money can you draw up there with it? I said, that fight there, being conservative, I think we'll do $75,000.
Norris liked what he heard and outbid Ray Arcel for the fight. Basilio now had his first big break, a shot at Gavilan's welterweight title. And I thought I won the fight, but they gave him the decision. At least I won the respect of the people that didn't give me a chance before.
And Carmen surprised everybody when he put him down.
That same month, boxing was in for an even bigger surprise. only this one occurred outside the ring. The victim was Ray Arcel.
He was standing in front of a hotel in Boston, and all of a sudden he was hit from behind apparently by a lead pipe.
They wanted to send a message to people that wanted to buck the IBC and the underworld that if you got in our way, you were going to get hurt.
He just thought it wasn't worth it after that to stay in boxing, that he would be a target again.
The Saturday night fights went off the air, and Ray Arcel disappeared from boxing for 18 years. Carbo's stranglehold on the sport was as solid as a ring post, and Carmen Basilio was headed straight for it.
Carmen Basilio will forever be remembered as one of the toughest fighters in the welterweight and middleweight divisions. With more on Basilio's hard-charging style, here's Al Bernstein in his continuing series, Bernstein on Boxing.
From 1948 to 1961, the span of Carmen Basilio's career, there were probably more great boxers active than before or since. That he is included in those ranks speaks volumes. He was called the Onion Farmer because he grew up on one in upstate New York. And he would give that nickname worldwide recognition, standing for toughness, courage, and excellence. What kind of fighter was he? Well, if you look in the dictionary next to the word aggressive, you'll see Basilio's picture. Backwards was not in his vocabulary. In his great career, he won the welterweight and middleweight crowns, fought 5 future Boxing Hall of Famers, and had 2 exciting wins over the excellent welterweight champ Tony DeMarco that are 2 of the best fights of that era. But the signature night of Basilio's career came on September 23rd, 1957, when he stepped up in weight to challenge middleweight champ Sugar Ray Robinson. It produced 15 rounds of total fury and a fight that is on every single top 10 greatest fights list. Basilio won the fight and the title. The sports raconteur Ben Bentley, who saw everything that mattered in sports for 5 decades, was the ring announcer that night. In the twilight of his years, he told me it was the absolute greatest sporting event he ever attended. I'm not a sports collector, but years ago I was given an original press packet from this Basilio Robinson fight. It's the only thing like it I've ever kept. And the only person who will ever get it from me is my young son Wes. When he grows up, and I can tell him all about the great Sugar Ray and the man they called the Onion Farmer. For ESPN Classic, I'm Al Bernstein.
After Basilio retired from the ring, he worked as a physical education teacher at Lemoyne College in Syracuse, New York. Now let's return to Fighting the Mob, the story of Carmen Basilio, here on ESPN Classic.
I think boxing is the swill barrel of sports. It's a dirty racket in many instances, and that's the way it's going to be. As long as a hoodlum figures he can make a buck by muscling into it.
I had to hang around till June of 1955 before I got another shot at the welterweight championship.
First of all, if you're a real good fighter, the word gets around pretty quickly, and most people don't want to fight you. And some of the real good fighters who might have had connections or controls, their managers or the people in control didn't want them to fight Basilio.
Basilio had no connections. He didn't want to be one of Frankie Carbo's fighters. He knew how things worked, how Carbo was pulling strings on his puppet managers, guys like Blinky Palermo, Rip Valenti, Jaime Wallman, and Bernie Glickman.
You can go on and on and on. People just fronting for Carbo.
Because he had the one conviction for homicide. He couldn't get a license in his own name to manage fighters anymore.
What Carpo was interested in was controlling you as a fighter. The only way you can get a championship fight is to sign a personal service contract with Carpo, which means if you win, then Carpo will receive percentages of all of your championship fights. If you lose, it doesn't matter because he already receives percentages from the person who defeated you.
Under Carbo's control, Kid Gavilan held the welterweight title for almost 5 years. But by 1954, he was showing signs of wear and tear, and the mob found new blood in Johnny Saxton.
Carbo had, in essence, both fighters, Saxton and Gavilan. It was a god-awful fight, and the decision was given to Saxton.
With the advent of Sports Illustrated in the mid-50s, boxing became a weekly target of crusading journalists. The daily press, on the other hand, seemed to fall into two camps.
You won't believe how many sports writers would besieged with gifts, quote unquote, at Christmas time, or some would get a handout every week.
These regular beat writers would line up at the Garden after every Friday night fight and then would receive handouts and cash.
One day, LaMotta went down to the boxing commission to try to get his license back. So as we came out, LaMotta was with Al Silvani, who was then representing him. And Al Silvani said, "No, just a minute, Bill." I said, "What?" And he stuck out this $20 bill. He said, "Jake wants you to have it." I said, "You tell Jake." And I said, "No, I'll tell Jake." I said, "Let me tell you something, Jake. I'm insulted. I'm insulted for two reasons. Number one, you try to buy me, and number two, you try to buy me for $20.
Of the writers who could not be bought, none put up a more vigorous or more eloquent attack on the mob in boxing than Dan Parker.
For the whole decade of the